So welcome everybody. I will first start by introducing myself. If you don't know who I am Kraig Brown. I am the Partnerships and Development Manager for Digital Xtra. I have been managing the charity since 2017 when it became an independent charity. The first two funding rounds, if you were familiar with or heard of Digital Xtra in the past, the first two funding rounds were government run and funded. And then in 2017, we became an independent charity. If you're on the call today, I'm assuming you know what Digital Xtra is, but just in case, we are a Scottish charity that supports extracurricular tech activities for young people. Specifically, schools and community organizations apply to our annual grant awards program for up to £5,000 to start up or scale up a extracurricular tech activity. So that's who I am and what Digital Xtra does. And as I mentioned, I am joined today as well by Anika Coker, who is our Community and Grants Officer. Anika is sort of the main point of contact for our grant awards, grant award recipients, I should say. So if they have any questions or challenges or issues or concerns, they get in touch with Anika. And then I mostly deal with money. So I deal with raising funds to make sure that we can continue to provide grant awards, but then also I deal with paying funds as well. So I mentioned earlier that what we do is we provide grant awards to schools and community organizations looking to start up and scale up tech activities. That's what we're here to discuss today because obviously applications are currently open and they will be open until the 27th of March at 3 p.m. So there's two ways to apply. There's an online form and a Word document that you can download. So we'll go through the online form today, but they are basically identical. And then there'll be an opportunity to ask any questions you might want to ask after. Before I get into that, though, I just want to briefly touch on the eligibility requirements to apply for a grant. So the main applicant needs to be a UK registered company, UK registered charity, chartered body, local authority, including schools and local government, schools, colleges, universities, actively involved in the provision of computing or digital technologies related activities for young people. The main applicant also cannot be a current partner or supporter of Digital Xtra. The proposed initiative needs to be extracurricular in nature, and there's a definition of that in the guidelines. Basically, it can't be delivered. It can't be considered core curriculum as part of the curriculum for excellence through classroom work. So lunchtime, after school, the sort of gray area would be, say, you're going to get a third party to come in and deliver a sort of non-standard activity, but that's being done in class time activity or class time. That's absolutely fine, particularly if it's part of maybe, say, a larger program. But anything that's sort of your day-to-day standard computing education in schools would not be able to apply for, say, laptops or tablets or whatever. It has to be extracurricular above and beyond. It has to meet the core objective of Digital Xtra, and that's one of the questions. So we'll just leave that and get back into it when we get to that question. The primary audience has to be age 16 and under. So if you do have some participants that are slightly older, that's fine. But the majority of the participants needs to be age 16 and under. You could also incorporate, say, family learning into the project, and that's also fine as long as the primary audience that you're engaging is age 16 and under. The delivery period for the project has to be between the 1st of July 2025 and the 30th of June 2026. So that is 12 months. Obviously, there's some pre-planning that will go into that, particularly at the moment where you're filling in your application or in June when we're going through the due diligence process. But the actual engagement with young people has to be within that window. And the proposed initiative will be delivered entirely within Scotland. So we are a Scottish charity and we only support projects that are delivered in Scotland. However, if you are a non-Scottish organization, that is absolutely fine. You can apply as long as what you're looking to deliver is in Scotland. And then the grant needs to be between £500 and £5,000. So you can apply for a project that might be cost more than £5,000, that's fine, but we would only be able to fund up to £5,000 of that, and you would need to confirm any additional funding that is required has been you will be able to receive that in time for the project's commencement. So that's the eligibility requirement, and I think that's a good segue to get into the application because the first page is actually going through those. So I'm going to share my screen now. So if you go to our website, and our website is digitalxtra.scot, please note that that is slightly different than what it was previously. We used to be digitalextrafund.scot. There's a redirect, so it's fine if you go to the old website, but we have actually recently rebranded. And if you go on to Oscar, for example, it still says Digital Extra Fund, but we have applied to change our name officially. So we will be properly Digital Extra very soon in all aspects. So if you go to our website, you'll see there's lots of tabs at the top here. Obviously, the Apply Now one is probably the one that we're going to view mostly today, but there's a little bit about the charity and the trustees. Some of our privacy and safeguarding policies are there as well. There's a history of all the grants that we've provided in the past. We've awarded over £1 million to 183 projects over the past 10 rounds, which happened over 9 years. So there's lots of examples or things if you want to refer to there. There is some detail about industry engagement, which again, if you're reading the application, you'll see that's a part of what we are looking for. So that there might be some stuff in there that would be of interest to you. We have a list of resources, which I'll click on very, very quickly. And there's a guidebook that was written a couple of years ago. We helped with that, but it was written by a company called Digital Skills Education and Skills Development Scotland. There's loads of other stuff here. So if you're not sure what it is that you want to include into your proposed initiative, maybe you'll find something here. There is some news, and then there's our contact details. But like I said, we'll go to the Apply Now. There is an FAQs page as well. So again, if you're not quite sure if this is right for you or you want some more information, you could click there. But probably the best place that you need to go is to the Round 10 page. There's a wee summary here. There's our core objective. Again, inspire young people to learn digital technology skills through high quality, exciting extracurricular activities, thus expanding Scotland's future talent pipeline. And like I said, there's a whole question about that. So you can read through this. There's the eligibility requirements that I literally just talked about. And there's the definition of an extracurricular activity. So top level stuff all there. If at this point you're like, yep, this is for me, then you click on this big blue button here at the bottom, and that will take you to the page that has all of the documentation that you're going to need. So there's a summary of how to apply. As I mentioned, there is an online application and an offline application, which is through Word. So I'll chat about them in a moment, but it gives a summary of them. Either way, they're both due by the 27th of March by 3 o'clock. How you submit it online is obviously online. Offline, you submit it to this email address here, submissions@digitalextra.scot. Please send it as a PDF. It makes our lives a lot easier. Please also make sure that the file name is your main applicant organization hyphen project name. So for example, St. Andrew's School hyphen coding club.pdf. We also have a series of webinars. Obviously, you're joining us today, and then there's the dates and times for the in-person ones that I referred to earlier. So again, if that's of interest to you, you can sign up here just as you already have for the in-person ones. And then here at the bottom, this is some additional resources. So we have all our previous impact reports. Obviously, that might not be the most of interest to you, but what might be of interest to you within those impact reports is some case studies that we do. So every year we pick a couple projects and just do a highlight reel of some of the projects that were quite successful. So obviously they're all listed here. And there's quite a variety of projects. So you can have a wee read about them. And then we did a full case study of Heart of Midlothian FC Digital Innovation Centre a couple of years ago. So you can read a little bit more in depth about that. We've got Southmere Primary School, who made some lovely videos on YouTube a few years ago. So we've put them up there. And then here is some information that you can use from some of our supporter organizations, Ada Scotland Festival and Glasgow Science Centre, who wrote some documentation on how to engage young people, girls and young women in tech, how to be more successful. In fact, the first one is not just girls and young women, but it's any groups underrepresented in tech. And then the first one is more specific to girls and young women. So if that's something that you're looking to do, which again is one of the questions in the application, you might want to refer to them. But here is the key documents, which is where you are going to apply. So we have the application form online, which I will go to in a minute. Then we have the Word doc, if you'd rather download that. And I'm going to see if I can share that here. I think if you can all see that. Anika, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see the Word document, please? Brilliant. Thank you, Anika. So there is the Word version of the application form. Like I said, I'm going to go through the online version today, but it is identical. So there's not a huge difference. Even if you are going to fill it in online, I would suggest maybe downloading the Word doc, going through it so you know what questions we're asking. As someone who's written a lot of grant applications in his time, one of the things I often like to do is create a bit of a story to my application so that maybe some of the questions refer to some of the other questions, or some of the answers refer to some of the answers, I should say. And there's maybe not as much repetition, but the only way to know how to do that is to know what questions are coming up and maybe tie some of those together. So it's a nice piece to download just for reference. You can also fill this in offline and then copy and paste that into the online form. There is a way to save your online form, but if you haven't done that, and then let's say your laptop dies or your browser crashes, you will unfortunately lose everything that hasn't been saved. So, if you do it offline first and save it locally, obviously you avoid that problem. But we'll go back here. Then there's the grant guidelines, which I think Anika has already shared there briefly. I cannot recommend highly enough to read those. I appreciate that they are quite extensive. After doing this for 10 rounds and supporting almost 200 projects, we try and cover as many bases as possible. And in doing so, I'll be honest with you, sometimes maybe we go into a lot more detail than maybe you believe is necessary. And I understand that. But again, as someone who has filled in grants for a large number of years, I appreciate when there's this much information available. So that's why we've done it. So I would highly recommend going through it. Then there is a sample project plan and a sample budget, which I'll refer to again later. And then there is a copy of the midpoint update and final evaluation from this year. That might change slightly next year. We always tend to tweak them a little bit, but it'll give you an idea of the level and type of information that we look for. I appreciate that, you're busy people, and I love the fact that you are doing this sort of above and beyond, many of you, what you maybe do in your day-to-day job. But as a grant funder, we obviously need to ensure that the projects that we are supporting are running and that they are achieving what they said that they would achieve. And so there is a requirement to do some feedback. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into it, because there is a question about that as well in the application. So if you click on this online one, which is the top one, and I'm not going to click on it because I've already filled in a mock application, it will open a new tab and it will look a little bit something like this. Now, like I said, all of these questions have been filled in, and the reason for that is I've already gone through it. So it will be blank. So this is just simply the eligibility requirements that you have that we've already discussed. And if you click on any that do not apply or that you are not eligible for, then it will tell you that. So, obviously I would not continue further if that's the case. But assuming that you meet all of the eligibility requirements, you will get down to this last one, which is not an eligibility requirement, but it's more just for our information. Have you received a grant award from Digital Xtra previously? If the answer is no, fine. If the answer is yes, also fine, you can reapply, but I will note that it has to be a notable expansion or evolution of the previous project or an entirely new project. You cannot apply for basically the same targets and outcomes in the same location of what you've achieved previously. If you're not a school, maybe one of the most easy ways to do this is to just deliver your project in a different area above and beyond what you're already delivering. If you are a school, maybe you could look at a different age group or something, for example, or working with a partner school within your cluster. So there are ways that you can obviously adjust it without creating too much challenge for yourself. But if it's basically to deliver the same thing, even if it's with new kit, but to the same sort of age group and demographic, then unfortunately that wouldn't be considered a notable expansion or evolution. So I'm going to click next. And then the next page, and if you've gone through this process before, it's relatively similar, but there are some changes this year. So thank you for joining us. There's some details here. So I've just put, myself, Digital Xtra, called our activity Extra Coders. I've put my details in there, some fake phone numbers, our registered charity office, although Anika and I work remotely. So if you go visit us there, we're not there. We've got our website and social media. We did have some discussion earlier this year about coming off Twitter due to political associations. We are still on X, aka Twitter, although not as active as we perhaps once were. We have created a new account for Blue Sky as well, which tends to be one of the more sort of one of the potential replacements for Twitter, let's say. But be honest with you, it seems like most of our engagement, particularly with educators, still happens on X. Let me know if that's changing or you hear of another platform that we should be on. But that's where we're at right now. LinkedIn is probably our most common way that we engage with audiences. So I appreciate there's not maybe as many teachers on LinkedIn as other industries, but if you're a teacher or an educator, I definitely recommend you open up a LinkedIn profile because it seems to be happening a lot more there than it used to be. If you are going to be delivering with an activity partner, you don't have to, but it's up to you. We just put this in. We just need one contact per activity partner. So in this instance, I have put Karen Meakin from Scotland who's one of our supporters. But you only need one, and it just needs to be top level details. So sort of name, email, phone, website. Please make a note that if you do put any activity partners, you should refer to them later on in the application so that we understand what it is that they're actually providing to the project. So then we go to the next bit. Now, this is a tweak from previous years. So if you have done this in previous years, you'll remember this used to be a scored question under targets and outcomes. Basically, it was you just had to define who your audience was. That's still the case, but it's no longer a scored question because you basically do it right or you don't. So it's hard to score it between 0 and 4, which is the scale that we score the questions between. So obviously you want to make sure that you add it up correctly. It will add up automatically here. So see, I put 10 in Falkirk, 10 in Edinburgh, and 40 in West Lothian. That did add that up correctly. But when I say add it up, you want to make sure that the next breakdown, which is by age, also equals 60, because otherwise it gets a bit confusing for us. Why did you have maybe 40 when you broke it down by location and 60 when you broke it down by age? So you want to make sure that those match up. And then you do a breakdown by gender now. So for example, with this project, when we get into it, you'll see I'm doing 3 cohorts of 15, which is 60 young people. But one of those cohorts is going to be all female. So if you do the maths, and the other 2 cohorts are going to be 50-50. So if you do the maths, that equals to about 64% female, 32% male. So that's how I got those numbers. There's no right or wrong answer for these. Just, as I say, make sure that it makes sense, I guess, is the most important thing. And then when you click next, let's hope my internet stays with us. Here we go. So this is actually the beginning of the scored part. Everything up before this was just making sure you're eligible and sort of providing us a little bit of information about who you're engaging. But this is actually where the scored the scoring begins. So before I get into it, I'm going to give you a very brief summary of how that works. We have a panel of volunteers that are made up from industry and the education and skills sector. We have each application, generally speaking, is read by 3 volunteers. Depending on how many applications we receive, sometimes that varies slightly, but for the most part, every application is read independently by 3 volunteers. They don't know what each other are saying or scoring about each particular application. Almost all the questions, except for one, which is budget, is scored between 0 and 4. 0 is basically you didn't answer the question, or if you did, it made 0 sense. 1 is you answered the question, but it was sort of didn't provide all the information we were looking for, or it was, for lack of a better term, maybe below average. 2 is you've answered the question, but that's about all the information that you provided. There's no sort of additional information or explanation. So as a result, we would call that probably an average question, which is why or average answer, which is why it's a 2. A 3 is above and beyond, meaning you've given a little bit more detail, and 4 is like the best answer that you could possibly give, and you've given lots of explanation and lots of examples, and it sounds really interesting and exciting. And so I appreciate that there is a little bit of interpretation with those scores, which is why we get each one read by 3 different evaluators, so that we avoid any sort of bias, and that there's an average of those. There are questions that that have multiple parts. So question 6, for example, has 3 parts. Each part is scored between 0 and 4, which is slightly different than previous years, and then we will average those out. So you will get an average of, let's say, I give the maths in the guidelines, but you could get again a score of like 3.6 or whatever for that question, because we'll average it out. But that's how we do it. And then we all come together in May, and there is an opportunity for each of the evaluators who evaluated a particular application to discuss it. They have 15 minutes to make any amendments they might want based on what is discussed in that 15 minutes. And then they submit to Anika and I their absolute final score for that application. And that's how we rank order it. And then we take those rank orders to our board and we present them to them. So that's how it works in the back end. So this is question one. There is only one part of this question, and it is basically to provide a summary of what your young people that you're engaging will be doing. It's not it's not an elevator pitch per se. That comes later on. It's not describing who will be delivering it or why your school should deliver it. That comes later on. It's not describing what equipment you already have. That comes later on. It is clearly explaining what it is that the young people will be doing, ideally with examples. The way we describe it is if you were talking to someone that had no idea about education and they had no idea about digital tech or coding clubs or whatever, how in 250 words would you describe to them what young people will be doing? And the reader should have a clear understanding at the end of that what it is that they will be doing. So that's the what the background of this question would be. You can include examples of how often it'll be delivered. It'll be fortnightly or weekly. We're going to do three, like I said earlier, 3 cohorts of 15 or 4 cohorts of 10 or however. But the reader should have a good idea of what it is that you'll be delivering. We're going to be using Marty the Robot or Lego. We're going to be teaching block coding or, the younger learners will be using maybe off-screen learning or whatever. But the reader should have a very clear idea of what it is that you will be delivering once they read this question. I'll stop after I've read a few, and if there's any questions. So once I get to say the end of question 3, I'll take a wee moment. If anyone has any questions, we can go back and refer to them. Actually, I'll do it after question 2 because 3 and 4 are kind of together. So, as I say, question 2 is almost like an extension. So you don't describe the activity here, but you describe your school or organization and why you're well placed to deliver the proposed activity. It could be what we already own X number of kit or whatever, and we already deliver these activities, and this will be a scale up, as I said earlier, of these. This is how it fits into our organizational goals or strategies. There's the Digital Schools Award, for example, or Young STEM Leader. There's a number of other opportunities that are already going on out there that maybe this club will feed into. So this is where you could describe that. And then the personnel summary, this is very much, list form would be great for this. But it very much is who will be delivering it. It's not only the main contact of who's completing this application, but as I said earlier, this would be a good place where you could reference any activity partners and the role in which that they will be playing within the project as well. As I said, it doesn't have to be in paragraph form, though. This very much could just be list form. But you want to make sure that you don't just say their name and their job title. You really, again, the reader should understand, why is this person qualified to deliver this activity? How many years have they been a teacher or a youth worker? What projects have they maybe done in the past? What are their core skills or qualifications? So you can give a brief summary. It's almost like a mini CV, I guess. But again, I appreciate you only have 150 words, so very mini. So this is an example of a question that has 2 parts. So as I said earlier, they will both be scored between 0 and 4, and then we will take the average between the 2, and that would be the score for question 2. So as I said, question 3 or 4 are sort of similar, related. So before I go on to that, is there any questions about question 1 or 2? You can either put it in the chat, because I think you're muted, so that might be the best place. No, they're pretty straightforward. Hopefully everything so far has been pretty straightforward. Question 3 and 4 is where it probably gets a wee bit more complicated. So question 3 is again, hopefully my internet stays with us here, is the project plan. So question 3 and 4 will probably take the most time for you, as the applicant writer, to complete. They're not the hardest. They're not the hardest question, in my opinion, because they're very factual, but they will take the most time. But that's also why we have created some sample project plans and sample budget, which you can download off that first page on our website that I showed you. The sample project plan looks like this. I should probably zoom out a little bit, actually. There we go. So, looks like this. There are sort of 5 or 6, depending on how you group them, main categories. So planning, procurement, training, delivery, which includes industry engagement and evaluations. You don't have to color code them. That was that. So this project plan was a real project plan that was submitted to us by a previous grant recipient. They ran a very successful project, and we really liked the project plan. So we have adapted it and used it as an example. It was a primary school, if you're wondering. So they are running 3 cohorts of 15, which is why I've sort of based my project on that. My fake project, you absolutely don't need to do that. Like I said, you could do 4 of 10. I mean, you could do 1 of 20 for the entire year if you want. It is completely up to you. We do also get sort of one-off events. So we've had science festivals and cyber quests and all sorts of stuff in the past. So there is no sort of archetype of project that you should deliver. But I would say that the majority are like this, where they sort of have a group of young people that they engage for 4 to 8 weeks, and then they will do the same sort of set of activities over multiple times over the span of a year. That is the sort of typical format that we see. So you can download this, and if you're wondering what this looks like in the online form, there we go. It looks like this. So there is each month, a breakdown by month. There is a plus and a minus button on the right-hand side. So July, there's none. So I've put not available because it is a mandatory field. So you do need to put something. So I put NA. But let's say that wasn't the case and I needed multiple lines. I can just add lines that way. And then I can subtract lines by clicking the minus. But every line you add has to have data in it. That is the mandatory little red asterisk. That's what that means. So I've translated that sample project plan here. So you can see there are 2 active deliverables in August. And again, so I've put them here. So this is sort of what it would look like. If you try and create it in this format, it's not that easy, if I'm honest with you. That's why we sort of presented the sample project plan in almost like an Excel spreadsheet format. And I would do the same if I were you. I would almost sit down with like a calendar, particularly if you're a school and you've got a lot of holidays and whatnot that you got to deal with, and an Excel spreadsheet. And I would almost like just cross-reference the two. And once you decide what you want to do, it actually, particularly if you're doing this format, it just gets a bit repetitive, which is a nice thing when you're doing this, because let's say you're doing 5 weeks and you're doing it 4 times. Well, yes, we do need you to put all that into this, but you can basically copy and paste it 4 times. And even the things that aren't maybe delivery. So every time you engage the young people, you should have them into this project. You should have it in this project plan. But even the things that aren't direct engagement, you should have that in there too. So like I say, submit the midpoint evaluation, collect feedback. So you can put those in there. Teacher training is the blue one here. So, you put that all into your sort of Excel spreadsheet or whatever, or your calendar, and then you just basically copy and paste it into this. And it is, so I literally was able to do this question in about 15 minutes. But that's only because I was copying it off of this. If I tried to create my project plan from scratch using this page, it probably would have taken me a lot longer, because it's just not visually easy to navigate, especially as it gets longer. So that's my recommendation. Again, as someone who's written a lot of grant applications, as to how I would do it. And then once you get down to the bottom here, you can see they're all in here. So you can see here, cohort 2, week 1, this is what they're going to do. Cohort 2, week 2, this is what they're going to do. If you can provide a detail of exactly what you're going to do, even better. But I just sort of put a generic one in there. And then they're having a career insight day, which is that industry engagement element that we encourage. And then cohort 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, post engagement data, analyze data, reassessment. And that basically has just been repeated 3 times. So it's not that difficult, even though it looks quite complicated. And then, like I said, at the end, write and submit Digital Xtra final evaluation. So that's the project plan. The other question that will take you a bit longer, but it's not difficult, is the budget. And as a result, that's why we have the budget here as a sample. So you really need to decide what it is that you want to do beforehand. If it is a general appeal for funding because we want to buy something, you're not going to be successful, if I'm honest with you. Last year we had over 100. We had almost 130 applications last year. We had 20 that were successful. I am not saying that the 110 that weren't successful were bad applications. They just weren't in the top 20. Okay. So you're not necessarily trying to write something that is only good. You have to write something that is better than the rest. I mean, there's not really a nice way of putting that. I know it sounds a bit harsh, but we have limited resources, and so we're only able to fund a limited number of projects. And in order to do that, we have to fund the ones that we think will be the most successful and have the most high quality engagement. So, the more detail that you can provide, the better. A general appeal, for example, probably not going to be successful. So if you are going to do, like I said, we're going to do 3 cohorts of 15, and we're going to use Lego Education Spike Essential. We're going to use Marty the Robot, and we're going to use Microbit, and that's the 3 pieces of kit. And I'll be honest with you, if you have a 5-week project, 3 pieces of kit is a lot. I mean, most people apply for, say, 1 or maybe 2 pieces of kit. But again, this is just sort of general, but you got to tailor it to what you want to deliver. And then we've got accessories A, accessories B, accessories C. Again, I would be more specific. That's why we've put please be specific. If you can provide a link, even better. Don't forget your batteries. Don't forget your registration fees. Don't forget your storage boxes. A lot of people just apply for the kit and they think that's all they need. But actually, you need a place to store it. You need a way to power it. You need USB cables. You need USB ports. You need training. Do not underestimate training, both in terms of time and cost. A lot of people, what they do in that project plan, for example, is they'll start engaging young people in like September. I mean, you're just back to school, particularly if you're a school and you're not running over the summer. You're just back to school. You just got all this new kit. Procurement, especially if you're buying through your local authority, can sometimes take weeks. Give yourself a bit of a break. You don't have to maximize face time with young people. We want quality. We want sustainability more than we want numbers, particularly if you're just starting. So make sure you put in a cost and time for training. Make sure that you have, if you need admin time, it's great that face-to-face, like I said, but if you need time to prepare your lessons or whatever, again, I appreciate if you're a teacher, maybe you're doing this out of the kindness of your heart after school, and thank you for that. But if you're doing this as part of your living, you gotta make sure you put some salary in there as well. I appreciate that. So we can't pay a lot for £5,000, but you can obviously make a contribution for the hours that you're putting towards it. Office supplies, printing material, all that stuff. So once you sort of nail down exactly what you need, you get a unit cost for that. That's a little bit easier for stuff like accessories and Lego and whatnot. But in terms of office supplies, you can be a little bit generic. So let's say, we've put 90, maybe that's a good estimate, and that's fine. But you should put something in there. And then you got your quantity or hours, and then your total cost, and then you add those up and you get 4984. And again, how that looks once you plug it in here, it's the same system. You got the plus minus button on the side that you can make you can add or take away lines. But again, I've just copied and pasted it in here. Expenses, items, unit cost, quantity, hours, total cost, and then you put your total amount here. Sorry, you put your total amount here. I would say this. It's very off-putting if you're reading a grant application and someone has not added up the numbers correctly. So double check your maths, make sure that the numbers add up correctly. So let's say the project here is 4984 and you want to request 4984. Well, it's pretty simple then, that the grant will cover the entire project. But as I said earlier, let's say the project costs 7,000. Or let's say you already have a donation of 500 or whatever, then the grant amount requested might be slightly different than the total project cost, and that's fine. But that's where you put the grant amount requested in there. Similarly, you can't ask for more than what you require. So let's say the project cost 4984. You can't just put 5,000 in here for safety or whatever. You have to. The most you can apply for is what you need. And then, as I said here's a question. Will the grant award cover all the project costs for the proposed initiative? And if the answer is yes, then you don't need to worry about 4.2 or 4.3. But if the answer is no, then you need to provide a little bit of extra detail. So for example, here, I have put the detail in there, even though I have clicked yes here. So we already, I noticed, for example, as a reader, I noticed there's no laptops or computers in here. How are they going to code Lego or Marty or BBC Microbits without a laptop. So I've put a note here. We already own 10 laptops, so we don't need any more. So that's that's the level of detail or information that we need there. Um, if you are going to require additional funding or whatever for your project as well, you can provide some detail there as well. But it's only 100 words each for those, so it's not a huge amount of information. It's really, like I say, just we own 10 laptops, or we already own this software or whatever. Um, I think that's probably it. I will also say this question goes a little bit against what I was saying earlier about the scoring. If you only fill this part in, it's scored between 0 and 2. But if you do have to fill this part and this part in, it's still scored between 0 and 2. We just treat it as one whole question, no matter how much it is filled in. So I think as I said earlier, the most important thing is just make sure it makes sense. And this goes for every question. I would suggest that once you complete the application, but before you submit it, you get someone who's not an educator or not a delivery, someone who delivers coding clubs or whatever, to read it. And if they don't understand a point, or if they don't if something's not clear to them, I would take that at face value, and I would go back and maybe take a reread, because the people who volunteer on our panel, they might work in tech, but they probably don't work for education. They probably don't run code clubs. So this type of information, acronyms, they won't be familiar with that. So make sure that someone who maybe is on that level reads it before you submit it. That would be just a piece of advice I would give. So 3 and 4, as I say, are probably the most in-depth questions, probably take the most time, but I wouldn't say they're the hardest because they're quite factual. So before I go on to 5, is there any questions about either of those? Brilliant. Good. I think we're making good time as well, because those are the ones that, as I say, are probably the most complicated. So question 5 is the core objective. So this is, please explain how the proposed initiative will achieve Digital Xtra's core objective. This is, I would say, actually one of the more difficult questions to answer, and that's because there is no wrong answer. This really is an elevator pitch, and if you're not familiar with an elevator pitch, basically it's the time you have in a lift with someone going from ground floor up to the top floor to sell them your idea. Matter of seconds. In this case, it's 250 words. This is your opportunity to really reach through the page and sell your idea, sell your proposal, sell your project to the reader. Why is it, obviously within the context of the core objective, why are you, as I said earlier, one of those top 20? We're fortunately, I think, in a position to be able to fund a few more projects this year. I think it'll be closer to between 25 and 30. But why are you, why should your project be one of those 25 to 30 projects that are supported this year? So this is really the opportunity for you to put your emotions on the page, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, maybe. Don't feel like you have to be too professional. I mean, you obviously have to be somewhat professional, but feel free to sort of really, as I say, put your emotions on the page here to really sell it. And that leads me to another point. That's a new point that I've never had to talk about before, and that's the use of AI in writing your application. We have seen an increase in the use of AI. You can usually tell when it's AI. I'm not against that. Your application will not be disqualified if you use AI, or we suspect you use AI. What I would say is that AI by design is very general, very broad. So it's a good starting point. But if you just copy and paste what ChatGPT says and put it in your application, it's not going to grab that reader. It's not going to put that emotion on your page. Nobody knows your local authority. Nobody knows your school. Nobody knows your community center like you do, especially AI. So, I would highly recommend that if you do use AI, you go in there and then you change some of the words, or you input some additional details to really put your flavor, as I say, your emotion on it. And that would be my recommendation for this question. So the next question is question 6, which is 3 parts, but it's all about youth engagement. So the first part is generating interest, and it's kind of the similar idea in terms of your elevator pitch, but this is if you were talking to a young person. So we know young people have a lot of activities that they can do. I've got a son in primary school, so I know how many opportunities he can do. Why should they go to your activity versus another activity that is off or do nothing. There's also, not I feel like it's slowly changing. I feel like it is definitely changing, but there has been a stigma in the past around STEM activities and that they're not cool. So how, for example, would you convince them that this is a interesting, fun, meaningful, exciting, insert whatever descriptive word you want, activity for them to and why it's it is cool. One popular strategy is digital leaders. I mentioned them earlier, and I probably mentioned them a lot, mostly because I'd say most of the grant recipients we support do have some version of this, whereby they use young people who are interested and excited in tech to maybe get some of their colleagues or some of their peers to come along, and then you can actually reward them, I guess, with the Young STEM Leader Award. There's a couple different variations of it. There's sort of a formal and informal award. If you're not familiar with it, basically Google Young STEM Leader. It is a Scottish program ran by CERC. So I would check it out, and maybe you'd be able to use it to your advantage to help engage and attract more young people to your project. The other one is breaking down stereotypes, part B, I should say, which is somewhat similar to what I was just saying. There has been in the past, particularly a lot of stereotypes. I think there still is, unfortunately. We do see a much higher majority of young boys interested in tech than young girls, for example. Some minorities are less engaged in tech than others. So, this is how would you break down those negative stereotypes and perceptions? There is also sometimes an age thing. So, for example, older generations might think all screen time is created equal, and therefore all screen time is bad. I totally get that, again, as a father of a son who loves a screen, but not all screen time is created equal. That would be my message. And so maybe there's elements to engage families or communities to break down those stereotypes. So again, while that primary audience is age 16 and under, maybe there's other opportunities to incorporate family learning or whatever to break down those stereotypes. And that type of thing might be the difference between, say, a 2 and a 4 in terms of that scoring I was talking about earlier. And then the last one is engaging key audiences. So there are 3 key audiences that we prioritize as a charity. It's areas of high deprivation, areas of rural isolation, and, as I said earlier, groups underrepresented in tech, which could be minorities, it could be girls and young women, it could be young people with additional support needs, as long as it sort of falls within the remit of Digital Xtra. So, using technology to make their lives easier. Unfortunately, that would not be something that we would look to support, but enabling them to be able to use the technology so that they can have a fulfilling and rewarding career in tech, that would be something that we could support. So the definitions are quite specific. So if you're not sure, please do check it out. But basically, an area of high deprivation is a group in the SIMD data zones, which fall within the 20% most deprived in the 2020 Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. Now, I do appreciate that there is some criticism of the SIMD data, particularly when it comes to rural areas, because rural poverty is not probably accurately reflected in the SIMD data. I totally agree with that. And if that's the case, then perhaps this second one might be more appropriate, which is remote rural areas and remote small towns. And again, there is a definition of that, which is a population less of 9,999 with a drive time of over 30 minutes to a settlement of 10,000 plus. Again, appreciate it depends how fast you drive. But there is a map as well on our website that you can check out to see if you fall within that classification. And then actually the map is right here as well. And that will open in a new tab. So if you click on that, you won't lose your application. And then, as I said earlier, groups underrepresented in tech, and that's basically any group that is has a lower percentage in the tech sector or in a tech career than is represented in society in general. And girls and young women tend to be the one that is discussed the most in digital technologies, but it's certainly not the only one. But the example for that is 23% of digital technologies professionals are female compared to 51% of the Scottish population. So if you cannot answer any of these, if you do not target any of these audiences, you are still eligible. But again, like I said earlier, these are each scored between 0 and 4. So let's say you got a 4 for this one and a 4 for this one, and then you don't engage any key audiences. I should be able to do the math very quickly, but you would get an 8 out of 12 for that, which, again, you divide that by 3, that's a 2.6, 2.7 average score for this question, even though you scored the first 2 parts perfectly. So you're still eligible, but if you can, and frankly, that's just because that is how we operate to prioritize those key audiences. So that being said, if you look at previous grant recipients, by no means did all of them engage one of these key audiences. It is still possible to be successful, even if you don't target one of these key audiences, but it will help your application. So then the next page, so we are getting through it. I think we'll probably be on time, which is great. Digital and meta skills. And these are sort of a 2-part question again. So digital skills is, is what it is. What skills will they be learning in terms of the type of code, but not just that, but also like testing or I'm trying to think of, what algorithms, loops, if then statements, those types of things, more technical things. However, the other part of this question that we want to make sure that you answer is we need to provide context to these skills as well. So it's great that they're learning these skills, but how do they relate to the real world? And so that's where industry engagement can get involved in, and that's the next question. There's a project we're supporting this year that's down in Dumfries, and all of their projects are related to agriculture because it's a very rural area. So they're using technology in the context of agriculture, which is really, really interesting. And they've got the Royal Highland Education Trust involved. They've got a vertical farming company from the Northeast that did some work with them. So really, really interesting on how they applied context to their digital skills, still digital skills. Similarly, meta skills, kind of like soft skills, but a little bit differently. If you're not familiar with them, there is let me see if I can find it very quickly. There is a diagram in our grant guidelines. It's big and colorful. There it is. So that is meta skills, self-management, social intelligence, and innovation. And if you're not familiar where that's from, it's from Skills 4.0, a skills model to drive Scotland's future. So discussing in this 150 words what meta skills they will be learning and how, that would be how I would answer that one. And like I said, if you're not sure, you can also get in touch with us as well. But that document, the Skills 4.0, it's very comprehensive. So it should be able to answer any questions you have. The next question is industry engagement, which I alluded to just previously. So providing context is very important. And some of the best ways to do that is to get actual people who are working in a tech career. So sometimes you'll hear me say working in the tech sector, and that was the language we used to use, particularly when I started this about 7, 8 years ago now. The reason why I now say working in a tech career is because the tech sector isn't just its own thing anymore. There's tech in all sectors. And I mentioned agriculture a minute there. So it doesn't have to just be a tech sector or a tech job. You could work in finance, fintech, agri-tech, sports tech. It seems like everything now has the word tech after it. So it doesn't have to just be in the tech sector. So in Edinburgh, for example, there's a lot of financial companies. There's actually Glasgow's got JP Morgan and Barclays now as well. So fintech might be something that's of interest. Like I said, Dumfries or up in the Northeast, it might be agri-tech or how they use tech in the North Sea. We had a project a few years ago about tech in the North Sea, and it was I think it was in Shetland. So how rural areas are using tech. They had some 3D printers, so that was part of the project as well. That being said, you can't apply for just 3D printers. We do have applications that we receive for that. You do have to have a sort of a coding or computing element to it. But if you want to include 3D printers, we have a project this year in the Borders that is Lego based, and they're printing their own Lego pieces to make like bespoke creations, which is quite cool. So there's ways that you can incorporate it, but we wouldn't do just a straight up 3D printer application, for example. But back to this. Yeah. So I appreciate not everybody might be able to call up a local business or whatever. I mean, great if you can. But if you can't, there's lots of resources in the guidelines that you can use, which you can also just use as examples. You can have Careers Day where lots of schools do it, where young people sort of present about a career in tech or whatever. So there's ways you can do it. It doesn't have to just be industry engagement, even though that's the title of the question. But that's why the subtitle is careers in tech. It's more about highlighting the variety that's out there, particularly as the world becomes more digital. You can also get people to join remotely as well. You can also ask us if we can help. Lots of our partners, CGI, Cirrus Logic, Skyscanner, a lot of them like to get involved in the projects that we support as well. So we can maybe potentially, particularly if you're in near one of their offices, facilitate some engagement with them as well. Two more questions. So there's 10 altogether. So number 9, last year was called KPIs, and people really didn't understand it, and that was our fault because we realized after that KPIs is a bit too specific. So we sort of made it a bit broader this year, and using a term that I think a lot of educators are more familiar with, SMART goals, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So you have to define what your 3 SMART goals are. I think the one thing that I would suggest is these don't have to be a long-term clear indication about young people's attitudes or what career they're going to go into. Appreciate, you've got 12 months to deliver this. It's difficult to have a SMART goal related to that. So this is more about sort of maybe your targets and outcomes, or short-term attitude changes. But you're going to make sure you put in ways to measure that, which we'll talk about in part B. But yeah, so this is the 3 SMART goals, and we've received a few applications already, and a lot of them actually break it down by the 5 parts, which wasn't necessarily what we were planning when we described it this way, but actually it's really nice to read them that way. So maybe an idea if you're writing your application to actually break it down into the 5 points. But as I said, you have to be able to measure your SMART goals, in addition to the 2 feedback points that we described earlier in the call, which is your midpoint update and your final evaluation that we require. So you need a way to be able to gather data and feedback and narratives from the participants about those. I'll very quickly touch on the feedback, the midpoint update and the final evaluation. Obviously, we require those because, as I said, we need to make sure that the projects are being run effectively and achieving what they said they would achieve. In order to do that, what we do is that once you are successful in your grant award, we would do an onboarding and due diligence call with you in June. We would like to get you your first payment as soon as possible. It could be June or July, but if we don't get the paperwork done in time, because you do have to confirm your budget and all that to make sure that it hasn't changed, then it might be August. But basically, your first payment will be paid as soon as possible, but it's for 60% of the requested grant. So you won't have all the cash up front. So please keep that in mind when purchasing things, that if you want to purchase everything up front, you're not going to have all the cash up front. So you need to manage that cash flow. Alternatively, what some people do is they maybe borrow some money from a different budget pot. PEF was something that was quite common in the past, or from the local Parents Association, or they stagger their purchases and purchase some items in January, because the midpoint update is due in December. And once you receive that and Anika signs off on it, then you get the second payment, which is 30%. So at that point, you would have 90% of the grant award. And then the final evaluation is due by the end of June next year. And once you submit that and it's signed off, that's when you get your final payment of 10%. The only other thing in terms of cash flow that you need to be aware of, all of the items that you propose you will purchase needs to be purchased by the time you submit your final evaluation. So we can't pay for anything if you haven't bought it yet. So again, I appreciate that 10% might be a challenge for some people, because how are you going to purchase it before you have the money? In those circumstances, get in touch with us. What we can do is if you purchase it and then you send us the invoice, we will immediately make sure that you get your 10%, so that the money will be in your account as soon as possible. Even if the kit's not with you yet. So there is ways we can work with you. And I would say that is the case with pretty much anything, whether it be your project plan or your budget or your evaluations. I would say that you want to make sure that you keep in touch with Anika and I, particularly Anika, and just keep her up to date of everything that's going well, but also anything that's not going well. because at the end of the day, we are here to help you. If things change within your project plan or your budget, we are very understanding. I would not worry that that's going to impact you drastically. Obviously, if the project is going completely off the rails, then we would do our best to work with you to get back on the rails. If that's not possible, we might have to look at adjusting the grant or whatever, and we have done that in the past. But we would absolutely work with you on that to make sure that it's in everything works out for you as best as possible. We're nice people, I assure you. The last question is sustainability. And that is basically, yes, the funding period and the delivery period is 1 year, but the whole point of Digital Extra is to create projects that will have a longer lasting impact and give more opportunities to young people for years to come. One of the benefits of working in this area, in terms of digital tech, is a lot of the kit that's purchased, and about 80% of the grants go toward purchasing hardware. A lot of the kit that's purchased is obviously reusable. And so, yes, big part of sustainability is, well, we have the kit, so we'll just continue to deliver it. I think what people forget is there are going to be some additional costs. In addition, people move on, retire, resign, move to a different location. So, training. Also, I think a lot of people underestimate how much time it takes to deliver a coding or tech club. So if it's one person who's passionate about this, that's great. But that is also a red flag for us as a charity, because you want to make sure that you introduce other staff or digital leaders into the skills and get them to continue to deliver it if that initial person moves on or whatever. I've just seen someone has to move on, leave. No worries. Thank you much for joining us. We will be finishing up in about 15 minutes, so we will have some time for Q&A, which is great. This is the last question. But yeah, the sustainability, I would say, don't just say we've bought the kit, this person knows how to use it, we will continue to deliver it year on year, because that's only realistic until that person gets busy, gets tired, moves on, whatever. So additional funding, additional training requirements, incorporating young STEM leader, all these other things, again, which is what will take it from a 2 to a 4 in terms of scoring. And let me tell you, in terms of scoring, I think last year, basically, I think the lowest score was a 90 or whatever. And between 70 and the vast, vast, vast majority of those that were unsuccessful were between sort of 60 and 90. So we really don't receive that many bad applications. The reality is if you're going through this much effort to complete this application, you're probably serious about this, and you're probably not a chancer. You do get a few of them, but not too many. But the difficult part for us as a charity, as I say, when you have that huge mass of applications, which is sort of between 60 and 90, you as the grant applicant writer, you need to make sure that these additional details, these additional examples are in there to sort of get you above that point of what we call go, no go. So, I'm not trying to be harsh or discourage you from applying, but every year we get people that come back to us and say, do you know how many hours I spent writing an application and I wasn't successful? Yeah, I do. I did this for a living for many years. I still do, because I have to raise all the funding for the charity. And I do apologize. I genuinely do. I wish we could fund a lot more projects. I really, really do wish we could, but we only have finite resources. And so this is the process we have in place to determine that. So I'm trying to help you here today to be one of those top 20, top 30. We've got about 20, 25 people on the call here today. So, hey, fingers crossed, maybe you'll all be successful. So that's pretty much it for me in terms of, you've definitely heard enough from me, although if there's any questions, I'm happy to discuss them. If you get off the call here and you're not, you realize you wanted to ask something, or maybe you're a bit shy and you didn't want to ask it in front of everybody, you can get in touch with us. Our email address is info@digitalxtra.scot. Please keep in mind the extra is just XTRA. There's no E, and it's all one word. So info@digitalxtra.scot. You can drop us an email. We promise to get back to you within 48 hours, well, within 2 working days. But otherwise, if you have any questions at the moment, please feel free to pop them in the chat. As I said, this has been recorded, so we will post it up on our YouTube probably in a couple of weeks after we run the in-person roadshows. But that's the plan. So yeah. Any questions? I'll give it like, oh, I see someone typing there. while Stuart's typing there, I'll just mention briefly that there was a link that Anika put in the chat there that I've meant to mention and forgot. So thank you, Anika, for doing it, even though I didn't mention it. We ran a YouTube session, which I have to say is probably the best YouTube session we ran a couple of years ago, called "Closing the Gender Gap." It still has our old branding on it, whatever, but it's still really useful. And it was sort of 4 tips that we see for engaging more girls and young women in tech. And we had 4 panelists that were absolutely fantastic who work in education in a variety of different environments. So I think
You've
Leslie's.
got a raised hand.
I'm trying to figure out how
there.
to. Oh,
Sorry,
brilliant.
can
Hi,
you hear
Leslie.
me? Yeah. Hi there. Sorry, it's just a quick question. I'm a head teacher in a small rural school, and digital technology is what we obviously are looking to work on and improve within our school. Our issue is we lack of even devices. And we've just been told that with the new Windows 11 update as well, that any devices before 2016 won't work. So now we'll practically have no devices in our whole school.
Yeah.
So this was kind of my thoughts, was to like, right, let's think of a project that could support us to get some devices as well that can then be sustainable. That was my view. Is that a direction that I can go for applying for the funding?
So short answer, yes, but let me, as you probably can tell, I like to chat, so I'll give you a slightly expanded answer on that. The first one is, you don't need to apply for, say, Lego or Microbits or
No,
Marty or
okay.
whatever. If it's just laptops and tablets that you need and you want to do on-screen coding, that's absolutely fine. I will say
It was more
hands-on.
like Book Creator and things like that. And because one of our improvements at the moment, and will continue to be, is raising an attainment in our reading and reading for enjoyment, and then writing. So it would be creating books and digital and doing like green screening and all that kind of things. That was my vision. Is
Right.
that?
Okay. So unfortunately, no.
No.
Anything that's that would be what we would call digital literacy. You're basically using
Oh, okay.
apps and programs to be able to
Right.
use software that has already been created. It really has to be sort of coding or
But we
computing.
are big on our coding as well, and also our like Minecraft things. And I know that's another like
So if it
game.
was Minecraft Education Edition, whereby you can code elements of the game, that would be applicable. If it's normal Minecraft, then unfortunately that's not
No,
applicable.
it was the code inside. We entered a
Yeah.
competition and we got a special mention. We didn't get any placings, but we did get a special mention. So that's also something, because we're just trying and get our digital, it's something that's been a very poor area, and I'm fairly new head teacher to this school, so it's one of the other areas that will be going into our improvement plan. So when I saw this, I thought, I need to inquire and ask a few questions.
Yeah, so things like Bookmaker or Green Screen, or we've had
Is the
like
digital
creating an
literacy
app for engagement with the community and stuff. Unfortunately, none of that is applicable. It
Okay,
does have to
that's
be
fair
sort of
enough, yeah.
coding. So Microbit is great because I don't know about your school, but all schools should have Microbits now because they were handed out free a couple of years
we
ago.
do.
So
We're doing solar stuff as well at the minute.
Yeah, so you can get some really inexpensive accessories from Microbit, so that's great. And obviously the software is free, it's online as well, and the Microbit website has loads of great activities. So you could do an activity all around Microbit. And the other point I was going to make is it does have to be extracurricular what you're proposing.
Yeah.
If you are then intending to use some of that kit during class time, I'm not dumb. That's fine. I'm not gonna, we're not saying it has to be put in the cupboard and can only be used during the club. Just don't even mention it though in the application.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I appreciate
No,
your
my
help.
pleasure. So Stuart says, is it possible for collaborative organizations to provide supporting letters to an application? No, unfortunately, the only thing that we will accept is the application itself, whether it be the online form or the offline one. You can't any additional material cannot be submitted along, or will not. You can submit it because it's an email, but we will not forward that on to the evaluators. What you can do is within the application, you could maybe use a quote or something from one of your activity partners, or as I say, in that personnel question, you can describe the value that they will add to it. So, as long as it's incorporated within the application, you can obviously do it that way. But we unfortunately cannot accept any additional documentation beyond the application itself. Cool. Is there any other questions? No, great. Okay. Well, listen, thank you all so much for joining us today. I really, really do appreciate it. We only do this once a year, so it gets quite exciting, but at the same time, it's a wee bit stressful. So it's great to see so many people turn out today. And I hopefully will see applications from all of you. As I say, if you do have any questions, again, after, just feel free to either drop us an email or drop into one of our sessions in the next 2 weeks.